or just before that, hopefully, and we'll send people home. The idea was partly to impart some knowledge from these guys to my right, mainly. So John has been involved in the industry for an awful long time, was heading up the Amenity Forum for quite some time, and obviously that directly relates to this sector very closely. Nick works at the Pesticide Action Network, and so is involved in a lot of the grassroots campaigns and helping councils go pesticide free. So I thought it'd be valuable to have both of these voices to answer some of your questions. I'm here to moderate a little bit, and then Brad is, well, so we've got two, not extremes, they're both very sensitive people with balanced views, but they're on slightly different ends of the spectrum of going, obviously one is trying to go away from chemicals as its ambition, and one is very much involved in an industry with people who are used to using chemicals and promoting the safe use of chemicals and that side. And I'm not trying to cause conflict or so I'm sort of the middle ground. We've got one already, so
I've got
Richard.
I'll just introduce myself.
Introduce Brad.
I'm Brad. I'll take the questions, and yeah, Sean's already done the introductions for me, so that's there you go. Fire away, please.
I've got a question for both. Do you think there's a middle ground?
Yes, I do think there's a middle ground, and I think thank you. I do think there's a middle ground, and I think we're probably it. I've been doing this for a long time, and there probably wasn't a middle ground 10 years ago when we started our Pesticide-Free Towns campaign. But I've noticed a difference, a huge difference in those 10 years. When we started, it was local communities, you over there, lobbying their councils, and councils were very standoffish. In the last 5 years, almost every week we get a council coming to us and asking how we can go pesticide free, and it's becoming more accepted. It's becoming more aspirational. There are councils here that have been doing it. Wealdon, we've got Cambridge as well, and various others. So yeah, I think there is a middle ground, and yeah, I think this is an example of how we're reaching that middle ground. It's not confrontational, and despite 18 years of us being on opposite sides, John, it is. We're sat here and we're discussing how we make it more sustainable.
I want to answer you. First of all, I think I don't like the question. Now, the reason is because I think this has been part of the slight issue I've got, perhaps with today, which has been really good. But there's this, it's all come down to a binary thing. Using pesticides or not using pesticides. I'm not in that camp. I'm in the camp of an integrated approach to weed management. So, to me, it's about looking at a particular situation you've got, a weed situation or whatever it is, talking to the client, talking about expectations, drawing up, making sure you've got a good preventative strategy in place, but then using the right tools for the job. So the difference I always have with Nick, I'm not absolutely pro-pesticides. I actually think if we can use less, it's great news, and that's what the strategy, the National Action Plan says. But please, I think the problem we've got is people go, well, what's the alternatives? To me, it's not alternatives. I'd like to be looking at managing this estate here with some glyphosate at times because it's the right thing to use, but using other tools as well. So I think that's part of the problem I've got with the question, Richard, which is that, I think the middle ground is actually taking an integrated approach to weed management rather than this debate about do you use pesticides or you don't. And if I'm allowed to go on just a little bit, when you took you talk about councils that got this non-pesticide approach. I've done a bit of work with a council recently who wanted to go down that. When we looked at all the issues around it, we found ways of reducing the use of pesticide. But actually, if you look at sustainability with its three elements, economic, environment, looking at things like social and carbon footprint and what have you, What have they ended up with? They've ended up with a policy which is an integrated weed management plan, making use of a variety of methods, including glyphosate, because that became the most sustainable solution.
Thank you, Bert.
Hopefully that's shown that actually there's a lot less animosity and a lot less of a divide than people often initially think. We've been members of the Amenity Forum for quite some time, and I think both sides often come to the table with preconceptions about what, if you're going to say the other side thinks. I think we're all kind of aiming for the same world. We're all aiming for a world where we're using products sustainably, we're promoting best practice. I think just being on one side or the other, you don't end up with best practice 100%, because if you're too much on the pesticide happy, use it all the time approach, then you're neglecting a lot of surface maintenance that should be done in the background to reduce the amount of reactive treatment you need to do, and also all those other benefits I was saying about brushing earlier, about access and about reducing heavy metals and things like that. You're not getting those benefits. Whereas if you're completely off the one side the other way, you often, there's such a lack of understanding about what the alternative situation, the integrated approach is, you end up with a situation like Brighton, for example, who went pesticide free without much of a plan. They were too heavily focused on the campaigning side of it and less on, well, how are you going to manage that instead? And often, even if you do go pesticide free, the easier way to do it is going to be a staged approach where you retain it as an option, possibly forever, but you retain it as an option certainly initially, so that your capital expenditure up front isn't so great, and you can get yourself out of trouble if you need to.
But you're doing a plan. I mean, sorry, just you're doing a plan. So you see, I think that's, you know, and again, something we all forget. I have been around quite a while, right? And I can remember council contracts where the contract was simply 6 applications of glyphosate at all these times a year. We have come a long way since then. So I think we've got to just keep it balanced. I mean, I don't blame this guy. I mean, the guy, he's going to be, because that's the Pesticides Action Network. I get cross with him when he talks about chemicals, because chemicals are used by us in lots of ways, but that's irrelevant. He's trying to provoke that debate. I don't have a problem with that. But it isn't the solution for everybody, and it isn't the solution for every particular situation. We've looked at a lot of hard surfaces today. You know, integrated management, pest management within your area, sports stuff, is really well developed. But they're still using some pesticides as part of that process.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and I think you're absolutely right. Councils have come a huge long way, and as we were saying just over coffee earlier, it's a story that's not being told. From those six a year, whether it needs it or not, down to 2, 3-year-old cases, 1 a year. And that's not a story that's being told by councils or other land managers, and that should really be getting out there, because that's a good news story. To your point on planning, planning is massively important, and that is what happened with Brighton. They were best will in the world, best intentions in the world, let's just stop. They stopped, and then it all turned, I don't know, hit with COVID as well, but it didn't work. So we recommend you develop an integrated approach. You do it over time, because it doesn't happen. You can't do it tomorrow. You take time to learn the new approaches to reduce things. And invasive species. Use glyphosate. There isn't an alternative at the moment that's going to be effective. So yes, there are things that you can build into, and it's that integrated approach. But having that direction of travel in the first place is what's important, and that's what we've been trying to do over those 10 years. And I think the number of councils that have massively reduced, and in some cases stopped, is testament to that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I agree. Working together is the way forward.
We all good on that front? Yeah.
Sorry, yes.
Surprisingly so.
Sorry, Randy, we're
Wasn't quite expecting that.
that's the first one.
There's one down. Has anyone got any questions in the meantime? So you've got a question at the back first?
Yeah, so Chris from Harrogate Council again. In terms of use of pesticides, the thing I find most curious is around, you've got agricultural policy, you've got policy within councils, and then there's the average homeowner domestic product type issue. And for me, I think that's something that doesn't get enough focus and attention on the individual and the choice that consumers are making in purchasing products. Roundup just being one of them, not to single that, where they aren't trained how to use it most of the time. A lot of the applications for use is not applied correctly. The disposal of those products is also not done correctly, and that is a huge problem. So I suppose part of this is councils, governments, trying to demonstrate the best way forward. But what about the domestic market in terms of alternatives?
Yeah, I think that's interesting that there are a bunch of issues wrapped up in that. The National Action Plan, not this one, but the previous iteration, had some requirements in it that anywhere selling pesticides has to have trained staff at point of sale to advise on non-pesticide alternatives. That hasn't happened and it hasn't been carried over to the new one. Disposal of domestic pesticides. Well, every council should have a chemical safe and a disposal site, but most of them don't, and even if they do, they sort of hide it because they don't want the expense of having to get rid of them. So disposal is a huge issue, and yes, people aren't trained. My recommendation, end the sale of pesticides to the public. They don't need them. There's no financial reason for it. You can do it in other ways, and it's not difficult. And it would cut out, well, actually, we don't know how much is used because there is no access to sales data on amateur pesticides. So, yeah, just ban it. And that takes one thing out of the equation. It doesn't actually have any impact on anything economically, financially, and there are already alternatives. I mean, so many things that aren't glyphosate, for example, are now called Roundup, are in the shop. So, it needs addressing, definitely. It is an area that's been neglected.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is, you can see, it always goes bang.
Yeah,
but
phase out, John. Phase out.
Yeah, because if you ban, you'll create even more problems because the amateurs will get hold of products in a different way. But I mean, there was a number of elements to your question. The first thing is as you probably know, I'm now involved with both Basis and Lantra, and I'm very keen to actually try and explore how the two sectors, the amenity sector and agriculture, can work closer together, because there's a lot of common strands there, and I think sometimes we don't help ourselves in the amenity sector by necessarily being separate. Going back to amateurs, I mean, I think we both agree that the products you can get in there should be, I think Katrina was saying, you know what's allowed to be got, but they don't necessarily tell them how to use them. They don't tell them how to dispose of them. So basically, I had a neighbour who was going up and down her drive, as it happens this time, with a watering can going up and down there. And I said, oh, what are you using? Oh, Roundup. What, have you diluted it yourself? Yeah. So how much did you put? Well, I got the water. I put what I thought was right in. So, that worries me a lot, because then you find the glyphosate in the water and everybody says it's all down to one thing. And my little other anecdote, which many people have heard before, but it's true, I'm a big veg grower, I've got allotment. And an old allotment holder a few years ago retired, and he said, do you want to look in my shed, John? Is there anything you want that you could use? And when I went in that shed, I mean, well, there was products there that had been banned quite a long time ago, and there were products without labels on. And I said, what's this for? He said, oh, it's really good. I said, it wipes out all the whatever. So what I'm saying is it is a difficult one. I've done the spot test which you talked about. I've been in, I'm going to say, B&Qs or whatever, and I've bought the product, taken it to the desk and said, can somebody give me advice? And they look at you as if you're from outer space, really. I've even got them to ring up head office, and then even head office said we can't really help it. I suggest, sir, you don't buy it. You know, so it is an issue, but don't let's over-egg it. We've got to get our own house in order as well. So, but it is a big issue. How DEFRA could address that, I don't know, because if you go on the that wonderful thing called Google or wherever it is, you know, you can buy stuff which you should never be able to buy, and even get it delivered to your house, because I've done that as well.
I think you've covered most of it. I think one thing that happens quite well is people like the RHS who put a lot of advice out for amateur gardeners, and the more organisations that do that kind of thing and promote best practice, the more people are likely to follow that sort of advice. There's probably some places where the harder you make it for people to get this stuff, the more likely they are to then try and see, well, how else can I do it instead? And maybe you've come across this advice, how you can do it without those types of products. So I think I would advocate for making it more difficult for people to get hold of, certainly. And I think every time I've been to the Amenity Forum conference for the last 5 years, it talked about what we're doing about internet selling of different products, which there's got to be a way of addressing, but I appreciate that's extremely complicated and I probably don't have an answer for you today.
I mean, Bradley might want to talk about sort of worm casts and things like that, and the banning of a chemical to use there, and then everybody then went on the internet and bought soil conditions and things which killed every worm inside.
Yeah, and they're killing everything, and then off the flip side of that as well, we've seen a lot of people using ground sheets and water, and went down a completely natural approach to reduce the amount of worms that were in the profiles, adding sand, because the worms don't like it to touch their skin. So there is other methods. It's just, as you've all commented on before, it is quite a long process.
And that's because of cricket. Sorry, unless people understand it, it's for cricket pitches and things like that.
Yeah, cricket, football, stadiums, golf courses, any sort of sports really that are played on turf surfaces. So it's quite a major problem. And it's the same with any pest, whether it's chafer grubs or moles, ants. There can be all sorts of different things. But for years, the answer has been getting a chemical tub out, and as John said, a lot of the time as well, it's been that unlabelled tub at the back of that old abandoned fridge that's at the back of the shed, as opposed to a chemical store. And unfortunately, there's still a bit of that lingering around, but we are coming to a point now where it's getting less and less. Like before, it was almost everywhere, but now we're significantly reducing numbers. Just a quick point on what you mentioned there about if we had access to the numbers for domestics and the sales. How do you think that might be impacted, and where do you think the change from that would come from if we knew the numbers and say if they were really higher than we expected?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would just fill in this knowledge gap about how much is out there and how much is being used. I was again having an interesting chat about data in general, and the paucity, the lack of accuracy, the lack of frequency of data about pesticide use, whether it's in the amenity sector, whether it's in the agricultural sector, or whether it's home and gardens. We can't actually either make policy, monitor progress, identify problematic areas, unless we have accurate, timely data on that. So you're not going to know whether the measures in the new National Action Plan are working if you have no idea actually what's being used and what's going out there. So data it always helps. It would be really interesting to know how big a problem, or even how small a problem the amateur use is. So having that sales data would fill that gap, I think.
I think, and again, when I was chair of the Amenity Forum, the pesticide survey, which is really important, you're doing it again, but we tried really hard last time to get as much participation, and unfortunately we still fell short of participation. But they did one in Scotland, the Scottish Government, and with the councils, and actually it became sort of virtually compulsory that the councils had to return, because they use various, I better be careful, but they use various levers, because I was involved with that one. So, and that, it was really great, because actually we did get a real picture of what was used. But I would make a plea to everybody in the amenity sector to do this survey, but it is really difficult because it's not compulsory, so people just No, I mean the other issue with the pesticide survey, seeing I've got a microphone, is sometimes, again, and it's one of the problems that sometimes can happen in organisations, they use farming terminology when they're doing the survey. So one of the questions, for example, on the last pesticide survey was which crops do you treat? Right, you know, I mean, unfortunately in Amenity, you don't treat crops, you treat hard surface, whatever. But yeah, I mean, there is a lack of data. There really is a lack of data.
Yeah, just on that, and a bit of a spoiler, we have just done a freedom of information outreach request to about 400 plus councils throughout the UK on varying sizes about their use, and one of the questions was how much did you use in 2024, how much did you spend on it. The last Amenity survey, from all Amenity users, so sports pitches, transport infrastructure, etc., the total volume of herbicides for pesticide in general use was 120,000 kilograms. Our survey of 400 councils, about half of whom actually had the figures, has already shown that they used 320,000 kilograms. So there's this huge discrepancy. I'll just reiterate that. You can't legislate without knowing the details. You can't monitor, you can't have effective indicators without having those details. So I would actually say that filling out the Amenity survey should become compulsory, because it will only help the industry, it will only help you, it will help people like me, and it will help the government as well. So that would be my recommendation to DEFRA.
I think along that as well, the other thing we need to try and get, if we're trying to encourage the uptake of integrated weed management and it being done properly, is the uptake of the use of integrated weed management plans. And we need to see how many people are putting these plans in place to a set standard. And the guidance we've got, the templates we've got, give a nice example of a good standard that we're comfortable with. That hopefully starts to allow us to see some data as to who's doing what. And then you can identify things that are gaps common to a lot of people where we can address them, and areas where, well, that would easily reduce quite a lot of the pesticides that we do, because you can see that these plans are missing that element, or people are struggling with this particular challenge.
I feel sorry for our chairman of the panel, but if I can just have one more comment.
Of course.
I am a major advocate for what's called the UK Amenity Standard. In agriculture, they have the red tractor, and it's been reviewed. If everyone had to hold the standard, you could link a lot of these things to this, because it would drive out bad practice, and it would actually be holding the standard. You've got to go through an assured scheme. You've got to fill or keep records, whatever. I think I've been a major advocate of this. I thought I was fairly close with it when they were reviewing the National Action Plan, but we've had change of governments and all sorts of things, and it's not there. But I really will not stop talking about it, because I think the day we get that will have a major impact on our sector.
Sorry, just on that point, do you mind if I could? Because you said about having a standard. Doesn't it mean it's a short standard? Surely.
Yeah, but I think what I'm looking for is what I would actually, let me start again. There are things like Amenity should, there are things like Law should, there are others. What I would like to do is to wrap those up into a standard. So in other words, you've got to do all the measures within that assured status. But then you have a badge which says that you've gone. That would involve training. It would involve a whole variety of things. You know, my dream before I die is that I watch the Open, or I go to the Open Golf, and on the first tee there's a logo which says these grounds are kept to the UK Amenity standard. That's what I would like, because then, you know, the industry is shown to be professional. Again, it won't necessarily be that they're not using pesticides. It would be about them having an integrated management plan, doing it in a proper professional manner, using professional contractors. We've got them in the room, right? People who day on day are doing these things to a very high standard. Sorry. And I never resist the temptation, especially when DEFRA in the room.
Thank you. It's very good answers. And one thing that crops to mind for me is particularly in the domestic market, I know we're going back to it, is when you're buying the bottles or whatever it comes in. You know, think about if you buy a packet of cigarettes, not that I smoke, but the imagery and the things that are on it, or lack of. It's a generic name. You know, they're all the same font, but then you've got the information on it. But you've got to buy some chemicals, and it kills in 60 seconds, or you know, it's all this fast sort of marketing stuff. If that was gone and it was just, this is what it is, here's the active ingredients, you know, a couple of images, or do not use, or only use responsibly, would that have quite a major change? Who knows, but you know, it's certainly something that can be lobbied and pitched and probed in the future. So I'm going to move on to another question then, just here at the front.
Yeah, there's lots of relevant stuff. But one of the things that we're finding is that we've cut our chemical use down by about 95%. So we use a lot of biocides to clean our headstones. And so we're using a fraction of what we used in sort of 2018. What we are seeing now is so-called sort of organics, like things like neem oil. You know, it's still as destructive to insect life, and you know, bees and all the rest of it, and the biodiversity in the headstone borders. And where's the regulation around things that are so-called plant-based or organic source? They're being used in the landscape in the same way that the pesticides were used in the landscape. But maybe they just don't fit into the definition of pesticides.
As far as I'm aware, you shouldn't be using neem oil because it's not approved for those uses.
We're not using it here. You can go onto Amazon. You went on yesterday.
I know. Absolutely you can. Yeah, no, I know you can. You can buy paraquat as well if you want. But I agree. I mean, this comes back to that point about internet sales and what people can buy, and lack of enforcement and a lack of monitoring as well. Internet sales are a huge problem. I did a thing a while back looking at paraquat, and you can get paraquat shipped over from China to your house if you want to for a fairly reasonable price as well. Yeah, it arrives on your doorstep as well. One area that we haven't touched on, and actually hasn't been touched on at all today, is that of biopesticides or biocontrol. And I haven't seen a lot of talk about that in the amenity sector, and it is an emerging issue, and it is actually very well covered in the agriculture part of the National Action Plan in terms of streamlining it. And I think that's an interesting development. I think there is room for more discussion in the amenity sector about how biocontrols, biopesticides go. I don't know if there's sports terms and stuff, but for sort of weed control and other things. There might be something interesting in that that isn't perhaps as destructive. But then also there is a question about if you're destroying things, it doesn't really matter what you're destroying it with. So again, this comes back to biodiversity and how much we want to support biodiversity and leaving more areas rather than just getting rid of everything, regardless of what it's with, whether it's hot water or it's with neem or whether it's with glyphosate. Do we want to be doing that? So again, there are discussions about biodiversity increase and that sort of thing. Extend it at this.
Yeah, that's good. Just on the biological, just so you know, there are lots of developments going on. I still have some involvement with the World Bioprotection Forum, and there are some really good things happening, and there's a lot of work going on. If you go to Jellics Hill and Syngenta or whatever, you will see huge developments. So just to read things are happening. If you look at the sports turf side, there's an awful lot going on in terms of biological. I think one of the problems when bios first came out, again it comes back to this binary bit, people said alternative. Well, it wasn't. People were used to putting a chemical on and getting a control. If you start having to put nematodes down to deal with the leather jacket, it's a different process. But things are happening. Just think there's the same sports stuff already, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely, and particularly in stadia environments, there is a mass amount going on, as John says, not only actively but research-wise as well, all through the stadiums, because you can imagine those facilities need to be 100% every day of the year when they're being used, so there's no room for error. And it's quite interesting that the sports with the most money have been the ones leading forward, as opposed to in the past they've been just throwing money at it to solve the problem the wrong way and hide it, whereas now it's really turned a corner and they're trying to solve these problems, and part of that is with grounds teams and greenkeepers being more in the limelight and trying to showcase that part of the industry, but through a sustainable pathway. That's been the idea recently, and there is a lot going on, and I think it's only going to benefit everyone in here and everyone wider as well.
I mean, I think regulating it in some kind of way similar to pesticides is probably a good idea, because you're going to get some products that can cause unintended damage. Even if you look at things like the grey squirrel being introduced to Britain, and then the diseases that carries that wipes out the red squirrel, there's unintended consequences like that, whether it's that or a giant hogweed weevil or a spray of some kind, whatever it is, that we don't really know. And to me, that's some of the reason for more research and doing these staged, integrated approaches. Let's do what we know to be sure is good practice, and start with that as a base, as a foundation, and then let's build on that with little bits we can work in. But some of the things that will make the biggest impact, we've already talked about a lot, and we already know, and they're common sense quite often. And let's start with that rather than some fandangled, bright, shiny thing that may or may not work or cause a load of damage that we don't really know about.
Yeah, I think in the sports sector as well, in particular, what I've come across is nowadays, if you try and buy products which aren't suited, a lot of the representatives will actually say that's not right, or I've had some before actually actively say, I won't sell that to you. Here's an alternative option, which possibly could be used, or alternative methods to consider. So there is change on that side of it as well, but it is very much a collective approach which is needed, as we've mentioned. Now,
sorry, just one thing. Where do we sit with fertilisers? Because fertilisers are generally seen as a positive thing, aren't they? But there's salt. We're still adding salts to soils. Degrading salts. So where do we sit with that? Where's the regulation around fertiliser?
One of the three here.
It's not my
speciality. It's way out of my region.
I'm not going to say I'm a specialist, but I mean, interestingly enough, I researched an article with Greenbest, who sell fertiliser into the market, and it was published in Turkey. And there is an awful lot of work going. And again, it was interesting talking to them, because there's lots of developments that you can get which are solutions to the issue. But again, wasn't it funny? It was all about the economics, first of all, you know. There are solutions now we could use that would reduce a lot of these problems, but it was about economic. I mean, basis, if you're an advisor in fertiliser, you've got to have a facts qualification. And that is part of that issue. So if you I'm going to give you a plug now. If you remember the fact scheme, you will at least have that assurance of doing that. I mean, yeah, fertilisers is often neglected, to be honest. And again, maybe because I'm a farmer's son, but again, maybe because, you know, I can remember in the 70s when yield was the king. You know, we had to produce as much as we could. I mean, I was a management consultant at the time. We advised farmers, we piled fertiliser on, because it was thing. What do? By putting that fertiliser in organic fertiliser, you're killing the bugs within it, which create the natural stuff. So you know, again, there's a real learning curve going on within this sector. So maybe it's the same for Amenity. We use less fertilisers probably, but well, do we? We use quite a lot on sort of turf.
It's quite a significant amount, but with respect to that now, there's a lot of soil sensors, there's soil testing, water at most football clubs, for example, is usually tested once it leaves the ice before it goes anywhere, so they want to know how much nitrate and sulfates have gone into the water. So again, there is movement, and all of that is reducing ultimately how much fertiliser goes onto these facilities. And managing it, you know, so they're also putting down only what they need, whereas in the past it was a case of get the bag out and put anything down and make it green. Now it's what nutrient do we need and how much of to get to the level that we want to be at. So it was that approach that we mentioned earlier. We're not cutting out, but we've significantly reduced and now targeting exactly where we need to be.
They're doing an integrated approach. I mean, we're in Birmingham, Edgbaston Cricket Club, and cricket, golf game. And if you went to see Gary there at Edgbaston, he's doing exactly that. So what he's saying is it doesn't make sense. So they're doing an integrated plan already, actually, in every way, on his use of energy, use of water. I mean, I remember going to a presentation once, I think it was the Pesticides Forum, actually, and we got Ruth Mann at the time, who was working in the amenity sector, to give a presentation. And a farmer that was there looked up and said, I used to think agriculture was complicated, right? And there's a huge amount. Leicester City have got their own turf research establishment actually within the training ground. Huge, huge. We could learn an awful lot actually from that kind of thing. And again, research, we've mentioned research, you know, everybody wants government money. Government money is scarce. But there is a real lack of investment in what I call research within our sector about reuse. And I think if industry and government could come together and do more in that area, that would be really, really good.
So some other interesting areas around agriculture. So at the Royal Farms, my dad came back with a story about worms. So the guy there has gone through a massive learning curve, having been told by Prince Charles at the time that he needed to go organic. And one of the biggest takeaways we walked away with was per square metre of field, the difference in what he's managed to achieve in terms of worms was orders of magnitude. It was ridiculous. So now they've got a system whereby if you put down so some natural fertiliser, it's gone in a very short space of time because the worms that are there are processing it very, very quickly. And so that makes the soil health incredibly good. And if you can promote great soil health via these natural ways, then you can grow things in ways that then require a lot less fertiliser, a lot less other synthetic inputs. And so it's worth learning some of those sorts of lessons, and aeration and things like that also help keep good soil quality without disturbing the soil too much and tilling up and destroying the microbiome and things you've got there. And all these things, the more research goes into it, the more we find out and the more we know, and the better off we are. But we need to start to pay attention to some of these answers and actually draw them into our processes in all these areas, because it's all very well this one guy in, you know, the Royal Estate's doing it, but if it doesn't spread a bit further, then we don't move on as a country.
Yeah, just on that again, this is this sort of sea change in agriculture. Talk about agriculture. So an organisation called the Nature Friendly Farmers Network, who are proper farmers. They're not organic, but they're making concerted efforts to reduce their inputs. And actually, your point about yield, switch that around.
Yeah.
So yield isn't now, well, for them, the measure of success, which it is for many in farming, looking at the yield of better farming. It's about income, because that's what really actually matters to farmers, is their income. So if they're reducing their input costs, whether it's fertilisers or pesticides or anything else, and the yields go down a little, but their income goes up, and that is the measure of success that works for a farm. And it comes back to that economic answer. And it obviously does work, because a lot of them are doing it. There's people in the arable sector growing commercially, people in horticulture, dairy farmers as well, are all part of this network. And to see that develop over the last 5-6 years, and actually spreading it, and because of that economic argument, it's actually getting farmers interested. It's a growing network. So you can never take economics out of it, but yet getting rid of that yield is king. It has really helped drive change and reduce inputs to the benefit of those farming. So again, it's this movement forward. Slowly but surely we are moving forward, and it seems to be benefiting nature and farmers' incomes, which can only be good.
Yeah, it still reiterates that we don't have that one solution yet, and never will have. I mean, we spoke about the aeration and the worms, and in sports we had a lot of sand to profiles, as I mentioned earlier, but then we have to ship that sand 200 miles times, 180 tonnes. Is that better or worse than putting that application as a product down at that point? Because we're probably actually considerably worse in total, but it's spread out over a larger area as opposed to a selective area, and so that's obviously then up for debate as well. I do have a question from Judith, is it?
Yes.
Does the panel believe that significant reductions in the use of pesticides in the amenity sector will happen without legislation, as in France?
I think back to the very first point that we made. I think that there have already been significant things. But whether it's legislation or a concerted effort from government to support very cash-strapped councils to do things like that, there's a number of recommendations, for example, interest-free loans for capital outlay, etc. I think we're getting there slowly. Depends what kind of regulation. I mean, obviously, I would say that yes, it would be great if the government could phase the use of pesticides out in the amenity sector in the next 3 years, John. But I'll compromise with you a little bit.
That's not a compromise.
It's a little compromise. But I think there does need to be government assistance, and whether that's on, and again, I am heartened. We had actually our first meeting with the Minister, with Emma Harding, which was already referenced earlier. And that's the first time I've met with a government minister in 18 years to talk about the amenity sector. So that's a good sign, a really good sign. We hope that carries through. But yeah, whether it's through the local government association, bringing together councils to look at share best practice, whether it's financial assistance of some description for the various things that are needed, there does definitely need to be government involvement in helping us go even further than that.
I will tell you a little story. So when I was there was a group of amenity people, and they said we think there ought to be an amenity voice, and that was where the amenity forum would do it. And you've retired, John, first time you've retired, and you could be the person to do it. I happen to know the minister there. I won't name his name. It was a Tory minister, and I knew him because he actually had a constituency not far from where I was, and I contacted him. And he said, oh, I hear you got this job, amenity. He said, so what is the amenity sector all about? And I said, can I tell you that it's within your remit? So he didn't really know about the amenity sector. So we've come again light years. So your answer to your question is, let's not start, banging. This is why I don't want this debate today to be about alternatives or whatever. It's about taking a balanced approach. The way this technology has developed today is amazing, isn't it? I mean, you remember when the old electrics first came out, and I mean, I would have been frightened to use anything. So what I'm saying is, but it's a balanced approach rather than this binary approach. This guy will always be binary because that's where they push. They push for no pesticides. I'm just saying, let's do it in a balanced way. I think at the end of the day, we'll both achieve what we want, but it'll take a bit of time.
Yeah, sorry, just on the technology thing, I think, it has come on, even 10 years, it's come along amazingly. I think as more and more people want the alternatives, it will again, it's going to come on, rapidly. The costs are going to come down as well. And I think to follow a few people here, it's like electric cars were 10, 15, 20 years ago. They were massively expensive. There weren't many of them. You couldn't get further than the shops. It's pretty mainstream now. And I think that's probably roughly where we're at, maybe a little bit further. But that's where we're going, and I think that's how it's going to develop.
I think the biggest thing we can do to move the technology forward is to start adopting what we've got. We've got so many people. I think we've quite quietly sold quite a lot of machines to an awful lot of people who are dipping their toe in the water, and they've tried little bits here and there. And we have some stories that really great success stories that encapsulate a very small part of what an integrated weed management plan is. And Lambeth have done a fantastic job on developing the community scheme aspect of it. Cambridge have done a fantastic job on the mechanical side of it and started introducing some other elements. There's been one or two councils that have done a great job in implementing some of the thermal technologies. And what we need is some more of the councils to actually run it as an integrated approach and put these things together that we know work. We've got success story after success story here and there of this bit, rather than what I'd love to be coming to you with is some success stories of some councils who have put this all together and it's working how it should, because the synergy of these technologies and processes and things working together is where you get the cost benefits, it's where you get the surface management improvements, the things, the surfaces doing the job they're intended to do. If you just attack it little piecemeal, you never get then away with councils or contractors or sports facilities who have a model to copy that we know works properly. So that's what I think I'd like to see over the next couple of years, is hopefully I've persuaded enough of you that this works, that we can actually get a few to spend enough time on it to do it thoroughly rather than just piecemeal.
Yeah, we've quite nicely moved on to equipment and new equipment, and one of the thoughts that I raised as well. Yeah. One of the thoughts that I raised was around funding.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of initiatives, whether we're moving to electrical equipment or various stuff within sports, there's access to funding. How do we make this possible or how do we start the conversation to make this possible for something like limited pesticides we saw potentially not having any?
I think it needs to be under somebody's remit. At the moment, we talked to DEFRA, the Pesticides Hub. Their job is managing pesticides, and so alternative machinery, etc., is not really under their remit of things that they look after. Yes, it's to solve the same problem, but they find it hard enough to generate the funding for keeping the use of pesticides safe, and HSE building a team to manage that and go and inspect people and that kind of thing. We need an area that is for helping the amenity sector. I think there's nowhere near enough money in managing parks, and the amount of benefit you can see that parks deliver in terms of mental health and physical health. Surely the savings to the NHS of having properly managed parks that are accessible to people is huge, and somebody or the lot of us really have to make that case to get the money under someone's responsibility to deliver that. Farming has it, you can get a machine developed by Rootwave and get a 50% grant on it, but not on the amenity side because it doesn't come under the remit of the same people.
I think that raises a couple of issues. One is about the sort of the siloed nature of government and how one thing is there and one thing is there, and actually they might both well be linked. So for the amenity sector, it's about parks. It's also about small businesses. It's about health. It's about pesticide use as well. So actually working together. I think it's a similar thing to agriculture and human health and pesticides, because there are human health impacts from pesticides, but every time we raise this with the health minister, not this one, but for the last 30 years, we've been told, well, pesticides aren't a health issue, they're a farming issue. But there are linkages there. It's about linking up these different parts and seeing them for a whole. So I think, that's a great point about the health benefits and the savings to the NHS, the parks are green spaces, and if they're managed well, they're going to be better for people, etc. Helping the amenity sector with capital outlay would be really important and really useful, because councils can't do it, companies can't necessarily do it as well. There's a lot that can be done to help ease the burden on those people that actually really want to deliver real change. It's great that DEFRA are here in the room to listen to this.
I promise we would never fight, but it really annoys me when you say health issues, because every pesticide that's used in this country has gone through a complete full approval scheme in instant conditions. But I don't want to go down that route. I think that is provocative, and it's a pity because but no, well, let's just leave that. I actually think in terms of this, it is a problem that immediately had. It always had when I was part of the forum, because DEFRA aren't the only ministries. You said it's health, it's whatever. Look at COVID. During the COVID look at the use of parks, look at the people who kept our roadways, highways, paths clean during that time. It covers a whole variety, and I think maybe we ought to be looking at weed, pest and disease management in a much wider scale, but it's always difficult. As I've got somebody in the room who works in government, I've worked in government in different guises. It's always difficult to get other people to work together, because look at what's happening this week. They're all falling out about how much cost savings each ministry's got to make. So, but it is there. But sorry, yeah, Nick, I just don't like it when you say they're unsafe, because they go through an approval scheme, which I would say to you, if you look under your kitchen sink when you go home and you look at some of the products under your kitchen sink that you use, they're far more dangerous than any pesticide that we use.
Asbestos was safe and cigarettes were safe.
Oh, come on.
Hundreds of thousands of people dying locally from pesticides every year. It's a fact. And tell that to the thousands of hill farmers across the UK who've had their lives destroyed by organophosphate pesticide exposure as a result of guidance from the then Ministry of Agriculture.
I think you better stop at that point.
Just saying, John. And I would be remiss if I didn't.
It doesn't have the argument when they say that.
I'm going to keep out of this one, but
very simple. Look at this. Look at the stock exchange rate from Bayer, which owns now, owns now Monsanto.
Right, anyway. We're at 4:30, which is the time we said we'd leave. So I think we need to be out of here fairly promptly with the machines, etc. Thank you all very much for coming and staying attentive and asking such fantastic questions. Before you leave, there's an order book on the way out. But please get in touch over the next few weeks if you would like to see some demonstrations of any of the kit you've seen. We have a team that can go around the country and help facilitate that. I'm sure any of the people who've been speaking today and many others in the room would be happy to take any questions you have that you go home with that are burning. There's lots of experts here, and we all need to put our minds together a bit more frequently. We'll see what the feedback was from today as to whether we do it again, but this is hopefully the first of maybe something we'll do a bit more regularly.
I hope we do it again.